The first thing I registered was the cold. A deep, biting cold that felt wrong. Unnatural. It crept under my skin, sinking into my bones with a vicious chill that had nothing to do with air conditioning, and everything to do with dread. I opened my eyes, but the darkness was thick, broken only by a faint, sterile light filtering through a small, fogged-up window in a heavy steel door. My breath plumed in front of me, a ghostly white cloud in the frigid air. Panic, cold and sharp as an icicle, pierced through my drowsy confusion. Where was I? This wasn't my bedroom. This wasn't the soft linen and familiar scent of lavender from my own home. This was a box. A cold, metal box. The walls were stainless steel, lined with shelves holding frozen, shrink-wrapped packages of meat. A walk-in freezer. Then I heard it. Laughter. It was faint at first, muffled by the thick door, but I recognized it instantly. A light, feminine giggle, followed by a deeper, masculine chuckle. Chloe. And Ethan. My husband. Are you sure she'll be okay in there? Chloe's voice was laced with a fake, sugary concern that made my stomach turn. She's tougher than she looks. Ethan's voice replied, smooth and casual, as if they were discussing the weather. Besides, she was complaining about the heat. I'm just helping her cool off. The cold inside me intensified, eclipsing the freezer's temperature. It was a cold born of betrayal, a cold that froze my heart solid. I pushed myself up, my hands flat against the freezing metal floor. The thin silk of my nightgown offered no protection. A sharp, cramping pain seized my lower abdomen, and my hand flew to my swollen belly. The baby. My baby. A wave of terror, fierce and primal, washed over me. I stumbled to the door, pounding on the cold, unyielding steel with my fists. Ethan. Let me out. Ethan. Please. The laughter outside stopped. The world went silent, and the cold began to seep in, not just into my body, but into my soul. That morning, the world had been melting. New York was in the grip of a historic heat wave, a suffocating blanket of 115-degree air that made the asphalt soft, and the city shimmer like a mirage. The air was so thick you could almost drink it, heavy with the smell of hot garbage and exhaust fumes. For a woman 8 months pregnant, it was more than uncomfortable. It was dangerous. My ankles were swollen. My body felt sluggish, and every breath was a conscious effort. I felt like a flower wilting under a magnifying glass. I had driven to Ethan's office in Midtown. The building, a sleek tower of glass and steel, that now bore his Namoride Industries, was supposed to be my husband's crowning achievement. He had renamed it from Vance Corporation just 6 months ago. After my father's accident, he'd said it was to mark a new era, a new beginning. I tried to believe him. The lobby's air conditioning was a blessing, a shock of cool air that made my skin tingle. I took the private elevator to the top floor, clutching a leather portfolio. It contained the preliminary designs for the new pediatric wing at Northwell Health, a project I was personally overseeing with the Vance family's charitable foundation. I needed Ethan's signature on a few documents. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into the hushed, elegant world of the executive suite. But something was immediately off. The air was stagnant, thick, and brutally hot. The powerful central air system was silent. It felt like walking into an oven. I found Chloe Sanders, Ethan's personal secretary, at her desk, fanning herself with a folder. She looked up as I approached, her perfectly made-up face arranged into a mask of fragile distress. Her dress was immaculate, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked less like someone suffering from the heat and more like an actress playing the part. "Ellie," she said, her voice soft and a little shaky. "What are you doing here in this heat? You should be resting." "I just need Ethan's signature," I said, trying to keep my voice even. My own head was starting to feel fuzzy from the oppressive temperature. "Why is the AC off?" "It's sweltering in here." Chloe's lower lip trembled slightly. It was a practiced, perfect tremble. "Oh, it's my fault. I'm so sorry. It's that time of the month. The cold air gives me the most terrible cramps." I asked Ethan if we could turn it off just for today. He was so understanding. She looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "You understand, don't you, Ellie?" As a woman? I looked at her, then down at my own protruding belly. The baby inside me gave a little kick, as if in protest of the heat. I felt a flash of annoyance. Her discomfort versus the very real risk of heat stroke for me and my unborn child. The choice was obvious. "I'm sorry you're not feeling well, Chloe." I said, my tone polite but firm. But this level of heat isn't safe for me or the baby. I need to turn it on. I walked past her desk to the thermostat on the wall. Chloe's face fell, a flicker of something hard and resentful flashing in her eyes, before it was replaced by her usual mask of vulnerability. Of course, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Whatever is best for you and the heir to the Vance fortune. The subtle dig didn't escape me, but I ignored it. I pressed the button, and a moment later, a glorious rush of cool air began to pour from the vents. The relief was immediate, a wave of life washing over my overheated skin. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I left the documents on Ethan's desk with a note. He was out at a lunch meeting that would likely stretch into the afternoon. As I turned to leave, I saw Chloe hunched over her desk, shivering dramatically, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were caught in a blizzard. The performance was so over the top it was almost laughable. I shook my head and walked out, the cool air following me to the elevator, a fleeting moment of comfort before the storm. I had no idea that for 38 minutes of cool air, I was about to pay a price beyond imagination. I had no idea that I had just walked into a meticulously set trap, one that would cost me everything I held dear. The smell of antiseptic was the first thing to cut through the fog. It was sharp and sterile, the scent of hospitals and hushed corridors. I opened my eyes to a world of white sheets, white walls, and the pale, worried face of my father, Richard Vance, sitting by my bedside. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, the lines around his eyes deeper, his formidable presence softened by exhaustion and grief. He was supposed to be dead, lost at sea 6 months ago in a yachting accident. Yet here he was, real and solid, his large, warm hand enveloping mine. Ellie, he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. You're awake. Thank God. The memories came rushing back in a tidal wave of ice and blood. The freezer, the laughter, the excruciating pain. My free hand flew to my stomach. A frantic, desperate gesture. It was flat. Too flat. The gentle, rounded curve that had been my constant companion for months was gone. A hollow emptiness had taken its place. I looked at my father, my eyes begging him to deny the truth my body was screaming at me. The baby? My voice was a broken whisper, a sound that didn't feel like my own. He didn't have to answer. The tears that welled in his powerful, commanding eyes and rolled down his weathered cheeks were my answer. He squeezed my hand, his own frame trembling with a sorrow that mirrored my own. I'm so sorry. Sweetheart. He choked out. The doctors, they did everything they could. It was too late. The world ended. My world. It didn't end with a bang or a scream, but with a quiet, devastating finality in a sterile hospital room. The pain wasn't a sharp stab but a vast, crushing void that opened up inside me, swallowing every thought, every feeling, until nothing was left but a cold, echoing silence. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside, trapped with the ghost of the life I had lost. Just then, the door to my room burst open. Ethan stumbled in, looking like a man who had been dragged through hell. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his face was streaked with dirt and tears. He looked utterly broken. A perfect performance. The moment he saw me, he collapsed to his knees by my bed. My father stood up abruptly, his expression thunderous, ready to call security. I raised a weak hand to stop him. Dad, it's okay, I said, my voice eerily calm. Let him stay. I need to hear this. My father hesitated, his jaw tight with fury, but he respected my wish. He stepped back, a silent, menacing sentinel by the window, his arms crossed over his chest. Ethan crawled closer, grabbing my hand with his trembling ones. His tears fell onto my skin, hot and wet. Ellie, I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry. He sobbed, his words a jumbled mess of regret. I never meant for this to happen. I was just trying to teach you a lesson, a stupid, horrible lesson. I asked the doctor. I swear I did. He said a little cold wouldn't be a big deal. I never imagined it would hurt the baby. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. I know you hate Chloe. I'll fire her. I'll cut her out of my life forever. Just please, Ellie, please forgive me. Give me another chance. I love you more than anything. He spoke for a long time, a torrent of excuses and promises. I listened, my face a blank canvas. Each word, each tear, Each desperate plea was like a scene from a movie I had seen before. The act of a man trying to save himself. The love he spoke of was a currency he was trying to use. But his account was empty. The man I had loved, the man I had built my entire world around, had died in that freezer. The person kneeling before me was a stranger, a monster. When he finally ran out of words, his sobs subsiding into ragged breaths, I slowly, deliberately, pulled my hand from his grasp. I looked directly into his eyes, the eyes I once thought held the universe. Now, they were just empty pits of self-pity. My voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried the weight of shattered worlds. It was as cold and brittle as ice. Ethan, I said, each word a carefully placed shard of glass. We're getting a divorce. The words hung in the air, absolute and final. The color drained from his face. He stared at me, dumbfounded, as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. No, he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. No, Ellie, you don't mean that. You're just upset. You're grieving. We can fix this. There is nothing to fix, I stated, my voice devoid of all emotion. I pressed the call button for the nurse. A moment later, two of my father's security guards, who had been waiting outside, entered the room. They were large, impassive men who moved with quiet efficiency. They halted protesting, weeping Ethan to his feet and dragged him from the room. His desperate cries of "I love you, Ellie, don't do this," echoed down the hallway before being cut off by the closing door. The room fell silent again, the quiet somehow louder and heavier than before. My father walked back to my bedside, his face etched with a pain that went beyond sorrow. It was guilt. He sat down, taking a deep, shaky breath. "This is my fault, Ellie," he said, his voice heavy with self-reproach. "I never should have agreed to it. This insane game." I looked at him, confused. Game? What game? And then he told me. He told me everything. Nearly a year ago, flush with happiness and absolute faith in Ethan, I had gone to my father. I had boasted that Ethan was a diamond in the rough, a man of incredible potential who loved me for me, not for my name or my money. My father, ever the cautious businessman, had his doubts. So I, in my naive arrogance, had proposed the ultimate test, a gamble to prove to my father and perhaps to myself that Ethan was worthy of inheriting the Vance empire. The plan was audacious. My father would stage his death, a tragic accident at sea. The Vance Corporation would be thrown into chaos, leaving Ethan, the grieving son-in-law, to pick up the pieces. It would be his stage. If he could stabilize the company and, more importantly, remain loyal and devoted to me in my time of grief, then my father would return and hand him the keys to the kingdom. A test of character with an empire as the prize. At first, my father said, his voice laced with regret, he played his part perfectly. He searched for me for a week straight, day and night. He grew thin. He barely slept. The reports I got, the photos you sent, he looked like a man destroyed by grief. I almost believed I was wrong about him. He paused, his gaze distant. But I overestimated his love for you, and I underestimated the corrosive power of greed. Once he truly believed I was gone, once the power was his to hold, his true nature began to bleed through. Renaming the company, promoting Chloe, the missed appointments, the late nights, I saw it all. I wanted to come back, to end it all. But you kept stopping me. He was right. I had made excuses for Ethan. I told myself he was just stressed, that the pressure was getting to him. I couldn't bear the thought that I had been wrong, that the great love story of my life was a lie. My pride, my stubborn refusal to admit defeat in the bed I had orchestrated, had cost me my child. The memories flooded back, sharp and painful. The day I met him, I was a pampered heiress, and he was a hungry, ambitious kid from a no-name town in Ohio, an intern at my father's company. He had a fire in his eyes that captivated me. That day, a massive crystal chandelier in the lobby of our headquarters had inexplicably broken from its mooring, plummeting directly towards where I was standing. In a flash of movement, Ethan had thrown himself at me, shoving me out of the way and taking the brunt of the impact himself. He had shielded my body with his own. The memory was a blur of shattering glass, a rain of crystal, and the sudden, shocking warmth of his body covering mine. He'd suffered a severe gash on his head, his blood staining the marble floor, while I was left without a scratch. That act of heroism was his entry ticket. My father, a man who valued loyalty and courage above all, took Ethan under his wing. He taught him everything, molding him from a rough stone into a polished gem. And I fell in love. I fell for the wild energy, the relentless drive, the story of the poor boy who had saved the princess. Ellie, he's not right for you. My father had warned me on my 25th birthday. I understand his appeal. But that same ferocious hunger that you admire will one day be the thing that devours you. I didn't listen. I moved out, gave up my position at the company, all to prove that my love for Ethan transcended class and wealth. In the end, my father relented. Our wedding was the event of the season, a testament to a love that had supposedly conquered all. Now, the memory of his warm body shielding me was a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the icy gaze he'd held as I froze. Was it all an act? Was that first heroic gesture just the opening scene of a long, elaborate play? The pain in my heart was a physical thing, a jagged stone lodged in my chest. I wasn't just grieving a child. I was grieving the death of my entire past. I looked at my father. The tears I thought were frozen finally beginning to fall. But my voice, when I spoke, was steady. You're not to blame, Dad, I said quietly. I was the one who was blind. I was the one who made the bet. And I was the one who lost. I took a deep breath. And as I exhaled, the grief and despair began to crystallize into something else. Something hard, cold, and sharp. Resolve. Thank you for this test. It showed me his true face before it was too late. Now, I'm going to make him pay. My father looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, followed by a slow, grim nod of approval. He saw it too. The wilting flower was gone. In her place, a woman of iron was being forged in the fires of betrayal. Whatever you need, you have it, he said, his voice regaining its familiar strength. The Vance family does not tolerate being attacked. I've already made a call. He'll be here in an hour. He's the best. An hour later, Julian Croft walked into my hospital room. He was in his early 30s, tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit. He moved with a quiet confidence that filled the room. But it was his eyes that held my attention. They were a cool, calm gray, like a still lake on an autumn morning. And they seemed to see everything. They held no pity. Only a quiet, unnerving perceptiveness. After my father made the introductions and discreetly left us alone, Julian didn't start with legal jargon or condolences. He simply sat down, placed a slim briefcase on the floor, and looked at me. Ms. Vance, he began, his voice as calm and steady as his gaze. I've read the preliminary report from your father. Before we discuss strategies or lawsuits, I need to ask you one thing. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding mine. This will not be a simple divorce. This will be a war. It will be fought in courtrooms, in boardrooms, and in the press. It will be ugly. And they will try to paint you as hysterical, unstable, and vindictive. It will force you to relive your worst moments, again and again. Are you truly ready for that? The question was a challenge, a final test. I thought of the cold, of Ethan's sneer, of the life that had slipped away from me in a pool of blood on a steel floor. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound. But now, it had a purpose. It was fuel. I met his gaze without flinching, my voice clear and unwavering. Mr. Croft, I said, the worst thing that could possibly happen to me has already happened. I have nothing left to lose, and everything to take back. A flicker of something respect, perhaps passed through his cool gray eyes. He gave a single, sharp nod. He stood, extending a hand. His grip was firm and cool. Then let's begin, he said. Welcome back, Ms. Vance. After being thrown out of the hospital, Ethan's world was a blur of panic and rage. The reappearance of Richard Vance was a ghost story made real, a phantom rising from the depths to reclaim his throne and shatter every one of Ethan's carefully laid plans. For a few hours, he was adrift in pure terror. But that terror soon gave way to the instinct that had always guided him, self-preservation. He holed up in their penthouse, the sprawling apartment overlooking Central Park that had once been a symbol of his ultimate victory. Now, it felt like a gilded cage. He paced the floor like a trapped animal, the mask of the grieving husband stripped away to reveal the cornered predator beneath. He convinced himself that Richard's return was a bluff, a power play from an old man who had lost his edge. He told himself that Ellie was simply hysterical, her grief twisting her love for him into temporary hatred. She would come around. He just needed to play his cards right. And so began his campaign of hollow gestures. The first delivery was 100 long-stemmed Ecuadorian roses, the color of fresh cream. They were returned to his office the next morning, the petals slightly bruised. Next came a velvet box from Tiffany's, containing a diamond necklace he knew she'd once admired. The box came back unopened, accompanied by a terse note from her lawyer, Julian Croft, stating that all future communications must go through his office. He wrote long, rambling letters filled with poetic declarations of his undying love and agonizing remorse. He received no reply. His calls went to a number that was no longer in service. His attempts to get past the security at the Vance estate were met by impassive guards, who looked straight through him. The rejection, so absolute and silent, began to curdle his feigned remorse into raw fury. He wasn't used to being ignored. He wasn't used to being powerless. He had clawed his way up from nothing, using his charm and cunning as weapons. To be so thoroughly shut out by the woman he believed he owned was an insult he couldn't stomach. "She's just trying to punish me," he snarled one evening, slamming a glass of whiskey down on the marble countertop. The liquor sloshed over the rim, a dark amber stain on the pristine white stone. Chloe, ever present, ever watchful, glided over to him. She gently took the glass from his hand and began wiping the spill with a cloth, her movements calm and deliberate. She had been his shadow, his confidant, his echo chamber through this entire ordeal. "Of course she is, Ethan," she murmured, her voice a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. "She's hurt. Women get emotional after something like this. They say things they don't mean." She placed a cool hand on his arm. "You need to give her space. Let her see that you're strong, that you're still in control of everything you built. The most important thing right now isn't chasing her. It's securing your position. It's protecting Reed Industries." Her words were like a drug, feeding his ego and validating his anger. She was right. If Ellie wanted to play games, fine. He would show her who was really in charge. He would focus his energy on the company, on the empire he had rebranded in his own name. He would make it so powerful, so successful, that she would have no choice but to come crawling back, begging to be a part of his world again. He threw himself back into his work with a vengeance. He called an emergency meeting of the board, striding into the room with a manufactured air of calm authority. He dismissed the rumors of Richard Vance's return as malicious gossip spread by competitors. He painted a dazzling picture of the company's future, highlighting their flagship project, Golden Bay, a multi-billion-dollar luxury resort development on the coast of Maine. It was his baby, the project that would cement his legacy and make Reed Industries untouchable. The board members, hungry for profit and reassured by his confidence, ate it up. For a moment, standing at the head of that long, polished table, Ethan felt like a king again. He felt invincible. He had no idea that hundreds of miles away, in a quiet, sunlit office in Connecticut, the real king was moving his pieces across the board. While Ethan was busy playing emperor, Julian Croft's law firm was operating like a military command center. The atmosphere wasn't one of panicked reaction, but of methodical, relentless precision. A team of the country's best forensic accountants, private investigators, and corporate lawyers worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and a budget that was effectively limitless. They were a silent army, and their battlefield was paperwork. They dissected every contract Ethan had signed, every transaction he had approved, every financial report he had submitted over the past 6 months. They unraveled a complex web of shell corporations, inflated invoices, and falsified profit margins. They discovered that the impressive growth Reed Industries had shown on paper was a carefully constructed illusion, propped up by siphoning funds from older, more stable Vance family holdings. It was a classic house of cards, built by a man in a hurry, a man who never thought anyone would look too closely. One evening, Julian laid out the preliminary findings for me in the library of my father's estate. I had been discharged from the hospital and was recovering in the quiet solitude of my childhood home. The physical wounds were healing, but the emptiness inside was a constant ache. Seeing the evidence of Ethan's betrayal laid bare in black and white didn't make the ache worse. It gave it focus. "He's been bleeding the company dry to fund his own vanity projects," Julian explained, his voice even and dispassionate as he pointed to a flowchart on his laptop. "Golden Bay is a centerpiece. He's sunk billions into it, convinced it will be his masterpiece. But the entire project is leveraged to the hilt. The financing is precarious, and it relies on a very specific chain of suppliers and contractors remaining stable." I looked at the screen. At the names of companies and the dizzying numbers, it all felt so distant, so impersonal. But I knew this was the language of Ethan's world. This was where he lived and breathed. To hurt him, we had to suffocate him there. What's the plan? I asked. My voice flat. Julian looked up from his screen, his gray eyes meeting mine. Your father has already begun. He's using his old network, calling in favors from people who have owed him for decades. We are not going to attack Ethan head-on. A direct assault would be messy and allow him to play the victim. Instead, we are going to dismantle his world piece by piece. From the outside in, we will create a series of unfortunate coincidences, a cascade of bad luck that will expose the weakness of his foundation and force the house of cards to collapse on its own. He pointed to a name on the chart. It starts here. The primary supplier of steel for the Golden Bay project. The owner is an old friend of your father's. Tomorrow morning, he will discover an unforeseen production issue that will halt all shipments indefinitely. A cold smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of grim satisfaction. It was perfect. Ethan wouldn't see the knife coming. He would just feel the slow, inexorable bleed. That night, as Ethan stood in his penthouse, looking out at the glittering lights of the city he believed he had conquered, he felt a surge of triumph. He raised his glass in a silent toast to himself. Let her pout, he thought. Soon, she'll see. They'll all see. He was a man standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, convinced he was standing on the peak of a mountain. He couldn't hear the sound of the ground crumbling beneath his feet. He couldn't feel the first tremor of the earthquake that was about to swallow him whole. The first sign of trouble arrived in an email. It landed in Ethan's inbox at 7:02 a.m. A sterile, corporate message from the CEO of Apex Steel. The subject line was deceptively simple: urgent update, Golden Bay project. Ethan opened it. A half-eaten croissant paused on its way to his mouth. The email spoke a catastrophic equipment failure at their primary mill, and an indefinite suspension of all structural steel deliveries. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process the words. Indefinite? That was impossible. Apex was the largest steel producer on the East Coast. They had contracts, penalty clauses. This wasn't just a delay. It was a disaster. He immediately called the CEO, a man he played golf with just a month prior. The man's voice was apologetic but firm. It was an act of God, he said, completely out of his hands. Within 48 hours, the second domino fell. The construction firm handling the foundation work for Golden Bay suddenly pulled out, citing a clause in their contract that allowed them to terminate if key material supplies were disrupted for more than a day. It was a domino effect, a perfectly orchestrated collapse. Panic, a cold and greasy feeling, began to seep into Ethan's veins. He spent the next week in a frenzy, making calls, pulling strings, and attempting to bully new suppliers into impossible timelines. But it was like punching water. Doors that had once been wide open were now politely but firmly closed. Companies that had been begging for a piece of the Golden Bay project now had prior commitments, or scheduling conflicts. It was as if a silent, invisible memo had been circulated throughout the entire industry. Do not work with Ethan Reed. The massive construction site in Maine, once a bustling hive of activity, fell silent. The skeletons of unfinished buildings stood against the sky like ancient ruins, a monument to his stalled ambition. Every day of inaction cost the company millions. A slow, hemorrhaging wound that was draining the lifeblood from his empire. Back in New York, the whisper started. Rumors of financial instability and poor leadership began to circulate among investors. The stock price of Reed Industries, which had been steadily climbing, began to falter. It dipped, then slid, then started to fall with alarming speed. Ethan felt the walls closing in. He grew paranoid, snapping at his staff, seeing betrayal in every shadow. The confident, charismatic leader was replaced by a haggard, volatile tyrant. The first of his so-called friends to pay the price was a young man named Todd Jennings. His father owned a major logistics company, and Todd had been the most enthusiastic participant in my humiliation, the one who had cheered the loudest when my nightgown was torn. His family's company was suddenly slapped with a full-scale IRS audit. Decades of creative accounting and hidden offshore accounts were brought into the light. Simultaneously, their three largest clients, all with deep ties to my father's generation of businessmen, abruptly canceled their contracts. The Jennings empire, built over 50 years, crumbled in less than a month. Next was Mark Chen, the one who had poured the bucket of ice water over me. His family owned a prestigious chain of high-end restaurants. A coordinated series of anonymous tips to the health department led to surprise inspections across all their locations. The reports were damning: sanitation violations, expired ingredients, falsified records. The story, complete with stomach-turning photos leaked to a popular food blogger, went viral. Their Michelin stars were revoked. Their reputation was destroyed overnight. One by one, the men who had stood laughing outside that freezer found their own worlds falling apart. Their family businesses faced ruin. Their reputations were shredded, and their comfortable lives were upended by scandal and financial collapse. They were like a pack of hyenas, arrogant and vicious when together, but cowardly and weak when isolated and attacked. It didn't take them long to figure out the source of their misfortune. Fear is a powerful motivator, more powerful than loyalty. My name was never mentioned, but the shadow of the Vance family loomed over everything. The message was clear: you stood with Ethan Reed. You fall with Ethan Reed. The first call came late one night. It was Todd Jennings, his voice a pathetic, blubbering mess on Julian's voicemail. Mr. Croft, please, I know what this is about. I'm so sorry. I was an idiot. I was drunk. Ethan, he made us do it. Please, tell Miss Vance I'll do anything. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything that happened that night. How Ethan gave the orders. How Chloe broke the key on purpose. Just please, make it stop. My family is ruined. That call opened the floodgates. One after another, the accomplices began to turn. Desperate to save themselves, they sent sworn affidavits to Julian's office, detailing the events of that night with groveling sincerity. They provided text message exchanges, timelines, anything that would shift the blame squarely onto Ethan and Chloe. Each confession was another nail in Ethan's legal coffin, another bullet in the chamber, ready to be fired. The betrayal of his friends sent Ethan into a deeper spiral of paranoia. He felt completely and utterly alone. A king with no court, a general with no army. The only person left by his side was Chloe, who had become his crutch, his only source of comfort and validation in a world that had turned against him. He clung to her, blind to the fact that the person closest to him was also the weakest link in his chain of lies. For us, she was the next target. Hitting Ethan's finances and his friends was strategic, but to truly break him, we needed to shatter his last remaining pillar of support. We needed to make him believe that his loyal, loving Chloe was just another snake in the grass. The plan Julian devised was subtle, elegant, and cruel. It wasn't about exposing her. It was about making Ethan expose her himself. It started with a plain brown envelope, delivered by a messenger to Ethan's desk. It had no return address. Inside were a series of grainy, long-lens photographs. They showed Chloe sitting at a secluded table in a quiet cafe, deep in conversation with a man. The man was Michael Thorne, the ambitious vice president of a rival corporation, a company Ethan despised. Just the photos were enough to plant a seed of doubt. But the envelope also contained a small USB drive. On it was an audio file. It was a recording of a phone call, expertly edited. Snippets of Chloe's voice, taken from dozens of different conversations, had been stitched together to create a damning narrative. In the recording, she could be heard discussing Reed Industries' financial woes, the disaster at Golden Bay, and hinting that a leadership change would be mutually beneficial. It was a masterpiece of digital manipulation, a lie that sounded more convincing than the truth. Ethan listened to it, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. The seed of doubt bloomed instantly into a poisonous flower of suspicion. He remembered her eagerness, her constant pushing him to be more ruthless. Was it for his sake? Or for her own? Was she preparing to jump from his sinking ship to a more promising vessel? That evening, when Chloe came into his study with a tray of tea, she found him staring out the window, his back to her. The tension in the room was a physical thing. "Is everything all right, Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft and concerned. He turned slowly, his face an unreadable mask. "I was just thinking about Michael Thorne," he said casually, watching her for any reaction. "Funny how he seems to be everywhere these days. He's an ambitious man. You have to respect that." Chloe's smile tightened just a fraction, a barely perceptible change. But Ethan saw it. "I suppose so," she said, setting the tray down. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," he said, a cold, humorless smile touching his lips. "Just good to know who your enemies are." He didn't confront her. Not yet. He would watch her, test her, let the suspicion fester. He would let her believe she was safe while he secretly gathered the evidence he needed to confirm his fears. The alliance between them, forged in shared ambition and deceit, had begun to crack. It was a hairline fracture for now. But Julian and I knew that with just a little more pressure, it would shatter completely. The most dangerous enemies are the ones who sleep in your bed and whisper in your ear. And Ethan was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The external attacks were working. Ethan's empire was crumbling. His allies were abandoning him, and his paranoia was eating him alive. But for me, that was only half the war. The other half was quieter, fought not in boardrooms or through lawyers, but in the desolate landscape of my own mind. During the day, I was a picture of resolve. I was Eleanor Vance, the iron-willed heiress, coolly plotting the downfall of the man who had wronged me. I would sit with Julian, discussing strategies and reviewing evidence with a detachment that sometimes scared even myself. But when night fell, the armor would crumble. The darkness would bring the nightmares. I would be back in the freezer, the cold seeping into my marrow. I'd feel the slick of my own blood pooling beneath me, the life draining out of me, the phantom kicks of my baby fading into nothingness. I would wake up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs, the sheets damp with cold sweat. The silence of the grand, empty mansion would press in on me, amplifying the hollowness I felt inside. Julian was the first to see through the facade. He had a way of looking at me, a quiet intensity in his gray eyes that saw past the carefully constructed walls. He noticed the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, the slight tremor in my hands when I thought no one was watching. One morning, after a particularly grueling session reviewing the affidavits from Ethan's former friends, he didn't pack up his briefcase as usual. He lingered, a thoughtful expression on his face. He reached into his inner pocket and placed a simple, elegant business card on the polished mahogany table between us. "Ellie," he said. His use of my first name was so rare that it made me look up. His voice was gentle, stripped of its usual legal formality. "I know this may not feel like the right time, but I think you should meet this person. Destroying Ethan is a necessary act of justice, but healing yourself is a necessary act of survival." I looked down at the card. It bore the name Dr. Maurice Thorne, with the title clinical psychologist underneath. I felt a surge of resistance. I wasn't weak. I didn't need a stranger to listen to my problems. But as I looked at Julian, at the genuine, unpitying concern in his eyes, I knew he was right. I couldn't spend the rest of my life fueled by vengeance. If I did, Ethan would win. He would have succeeded in destroying the person I was meant to be. For my own sake, and for the memory of the child I had lost, I had to find a way to live again, not just exist. My first session with Dr. Thorne took place in a calm, light-filled office that smelled faintly of old books and chamomile tea. She was a woman in her late 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a soothing voice. She didn't press me for details about the trauma. She didn't ask me to recount the horrors of that night. Her first question was simple, yet it disarmed me completely. Putting everything else aside, she said, her hands resting calmly in her lap, "How are you, Eleanor?" Right here, in this moment. That simple question broke the dam. For the first time since I'd woken up in that hospital, I allowed myself to feel the full, unadulterated weight of my grief. The tears came, hot and furious, a torrent of pain I had held back for so long. I cried for my baby, for the lost future, for the 8 years of love that had turned out to be a lie. I cried for the naive, trusting girl I used to be. Dr. Thorne simply sat with me, a quiet, steady presence in a storm, letting me know it was okay to fall apart. The journey of healing was not a straight line. It was a jagged, painful path with good days and terrible days. Dr. Thorne helped me confront the crushing guilt I secretly carry at feeling that my own stubbornness, my refusal to see the truth about Ethan, had somehow contributed to my child's death. She taught me that it was okay to be angry. That righteous anger was a part of the process. She gave me tools to manage the nightmares, to ground myself in the present when the past threatened to pull me under. Slowly, painfully, I began to piece myself back together. But I wasn't rebuilding the old Eleanor. That person was gone forever. I was building someone new, someone stronger, forged in fire and tempered by loss. Throughout it all, Julian was a quiet, constant presence. He never pried about my therapy, but he seemed to have an intuitive sense of what I needed. Some days, he would suggest we work in the garden instead of the library, the simple act of pulling weeds becoming a form of meditation. Other times, He would bring 2 cups of coffee, and we would sit on the terrace in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. He wasn't trying to be my savior or my therapist. He was simply being my friend. His steady, undemanding support was an anchor in the turbulent waters of my grief. It was a kind of kindness I had forgotten could exist. One afternoon, I drove by myself to a small, secluded chapel on a hill overlooking the Long Island Sound. It was a place my mother had loved. I didn't go inside to pray. I just stood in the quiet graveyard, the salty breeze whipping through my hair. I realized that my quest for revenge wasn't just about punishing Ethan anymore. It was about closing a chapter. It was about ensuring that the man who had inflicted so much pain could never harm anyone else again. Justice had to be served, not for the sake of hatred, but for the sake of peace. My peace. And once justice was done, I would have to learn to let go. Not to forget, but to release the bitterness that was poisoning my soul. Living a full, meaningful life that would be the ultimate victory. That would be the greatest tribute I could pay to the little angel I had never had the chance to hold. A quiet strength settled over me, a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. I was ready for the final battle. Back in New York, the trap for Chloe was tightening. The fake audio file had done its job perfectly. Ethan's suspicion had festered into a full-blown obsession. He had hired a private investigator to tail her, his mind now completely convinced of her treachery. The investigator's report was the final nail in her coffin. It confirmed that Chloe had not only met with Michael Thorne twice more, but had also been wiring large sums of money to an offshore account. She had even made inquiries at a foreign embassy about residency requirements. She was preparing an exit strategy. She was planning to abandon him. The night he received the report, Ethan's sanity finally snapped. He summoned Chloe to his home office, the same room where they had toasted their successes and plotted their schemes. The air was thick with menace. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He simply tossed the investigator's folder onto the desk in front of her. It landed with a heavy thud. "Explain this," he said, his voice dangerously low. Chloe's face went white as she looked at the photos, the bank statements, the visa applications. The evidence was irrefutable. She knew, in that instant, that the game was over. The tears, the pleading, the fragile victim act, none of it would work on the man standing before her now. His eyes were cold, dead things. For a moment, she was terrified. But then, something else rose up inside her, years of resentment, of feeling second best, of swallowing her pride. The fear was replaced by a bitter, reckless fury. If she was going down, she wasn't going down alone. She threw her head back and laughed. A harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the silent room. "Explain it," she sneered, her voice dripping with scorn. "You want me to explain it? What about you, Ethan? Who was the first traitor here? Who promised a poor girl from Ohio the world, then threw her away the second a rich princess batted her eyelashes at him? You talk about betrayal. You don't even know the meaning of the word." Ethan stared at her, momentarily stunned by her transformation. The meek, adoring kitten had revealed herself to be a viper. "Don't you dare bring Ellie into this," he growled. "This is about you and your greed." "My greed?" she shrieked, her voice rising with hysteria. "Everything I did for us. I helped you get close to her father. I helped you plan every move. I was the one who suggested the freezer. I was the one who stood by you when you murdered her baby. We are in this together. Ethan, don't you ever forget that. If I sink, I'm dragging you to the bottom of the ocean with me." Each word was a confession, a venomous admission of guilt. They were so consumed by their mutual hatred, so desperate to wound each other, that they had become completely oblivious to their surroundings. They didn't notice the sleek, black fountain pen sitting in the holder on Ethan's desk, a recent gift from a new client. It was a beautiful, expensive pen. It was also a state-of-the-art recording device, activated remotely an hour earlier. Every accusation, every threat, every screamed confession from their toxic, imploding partnership was being captured in crystal-clear audio. It was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence, the smoking gun. And it had been delivered not by our lawyers or investigators, but by their own poisoned souls. The day of the press conference was a calculated spectacle. We booked the largest ballroom of the Pierre, a symbol of old New York wealth and power, a subtle reminder of the world Ethan had tried and failed to conquer. By 10 a.m., the room was a chaotic sea of cameras, microphones, and reporters from every major news outlet in the country. The air crackled with anticipation. Everyone knew a storm was coming. They just didn't know it was going to be a hurricane. At precisely 10:30, the double doors at the back of the ballroom opened. A hush fell over the room as Julian and I walked towards the stage. The only sounds were the frantic clicking of camera shutters, a sound like 1,000 angry insects. I was wearing a simple, impeccably tailored white pantsuit. It was a deliberate choice, not the black of mourning or the red of vengeance, but the white of truth and clarity. My hair was cut in a sharp, modern bob, and my face was set in a calm, resolute expression. I was not here as a victim seeking pity. I was here as a survivor demanding justice. Julian, a bastion of calm in his dark suit, stepped up to the podium first. His voice was steady and clear, cutting through the charged atmosphere. Good morning. My name is Julian Croft, and I am the legal counsel for Ms. Eleanor Vance. We are here today to present the truth about the unimaginable trauma my client has endured, and the truth about the monstrous character of the man the world knows as Ethan Reed. Without further preamble, he signaled to a technician. The massive screen behind him flickered to life. The first image that appeared caused a collective gasp to ripple through the room. It was a photo I had taken with my trembling hand in the first moments of my captivity. My face, pale with fear, reflected in the small window of the freezer door. But the real horror was the image on the other side of the glass. There was Ethan, a smirk playing on his lips, his arm draped casually around Chloe's shoulders as they both peered in. Their expressions a sickening mix of amusement and contempt. Image after image flashed across the screen, each one more damning than the last. Me, huddled in the corner, my thin nightgown providing no warmth. The leering faces of Ethan's friends. The moment the silk was torn from my body, a blur of motion and humiliation. The circle of ice blocks. And finally, the most horrifying image of all, a low-angle shot showing the dark, spreading pool of blood on the metallic floor. The room was utterly silent. The reporters too stunned to even speak. The images told a story more powerful than any words could. Julian let the silence hang for a long moment before he began to read, his voice cold and precise. From the sworn affidavits of Todd Jennings and the others, Ethan told us, quote, "Today I'm going to teach her a lesson in humility." End quote. Julian read, his eyes scanning the room. Another witness, a young woman who was present, stated in her testimony, "I warned him. I told him he was going to kill them both. He just laughed and said, 'What's a little hardship? The ambulance is already on standby.'" Each quote was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the carefully crafted public image of Ethan Reed, the devoted husband and brilliant businessman. Then, it was my turn. I walked to the podium, my step steady, my posture unwavering. I looked out at the sea of faces, the flashing lights, and I felt no fear. I was done being afraid. My voice was quiet, but every microphone in the room picked it up, carrying it to the corners of the ballroom and out into the world. "I am not here today to ask for your sympathy," I began, my voice clear and strong. "I am here to demand accountability. I am here for the child who never got to draw his first breath. For 8 years, I loved a man who was a fantasy, an illusion I desperately wanted to believe in. I paid the price for that blindness with the most precious thing in my life." I paused, taking a breath, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. I hope my story serves as a warning. Abuse is not always a closed fist. Sometimes, it's a cold smile. Sometimes, it's a calculated act of cruelty disguised as a lesson. But no matter what form it takes, it is a crime, and those who commit it must be held responsible. I stepped back from the podium. The press conference was over. We didn't take questions. The evidence spoke for itself. As Julian and I walked out of the ballroom, flanked by security, the room erupted into a frenzy behind us. We had lit the fuse. Now, we just had to watch the explosion. Ethan was in his office, watching the live stream on his computer, his world imploding in real time. He saw the photos, heard the testimonies, listened to my speech. The color drained from his face, replaced by a mottled, purple rage. It was a betrayal on a scale he couldn't comprehend. That Ellie, his quiet, pliant Ellie, would do this to him publicly. Brutality was unthinkable. He grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling as he dialed his head of PR. "Kill it," he screamed into the receiver. "Kill the story. Use the money. Use whatever you have to. I want every article, every video, taken down now." The voice on the other end was small and trembling. "Mr. Reed, it's too late. It's everywhere. It's the #1 trending topic in the world. There's nothing we can do. Ethan hurled the phone against the wall, where it shattered into a dozen pieces. But the nightmare was only just beginning. Just as the initial shockwave from the press conference began to ripple across the globe, Julian executed the final, devastating move. He released the audio file. A major investigative journalism outlet, one known for its integrity and reach, published it under the headline "The Reconfession." In his own words, the recording was a nuclear bomb. The raw, unfiltered hatred in their voices. The casual discussion of my torture. Chloe's shrieking admission that she'd helped plan it. Ethan's threats, it was all there. It was the undeniable truth, straight from the mouths of the perpetrators. Any sliver of doubt, any possibility for him to spin a counter-narrative, was instantly obliterated. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The stock market opened. And Reed Industries stock didn't just fall. It plummeted off a cliff. It lost 40% of its value in the first hour. The phone lines to the corporate office lit up like a Christmas tree. But the calls weren't from the press. They were from furious board members and panicked investors, demanding blood. They convened an emergency meeting via video conference. Ethan, his face pale and drawn, logged on to face a firing squad. There was no sympathy, no discussion, just cold, hard fury. "Look what you've done, Ethan," roared an elderly board member, a man who had been my father's closest friend for 30 years. "You haven't just disgraced yourself. You set fire to our life's work. The company has lost over $20 billion in market value this morning because of your disgusting personal life." Another chimed in, her voice dripping with ice. "We invested in a businessman, not a sociopath. You are a liability that this company can no longer afford." The motion was swift, a vote of no confidence. He was stripped of his title as chairman. He was stripped of his role as CEO. He was terminated, effective immediately. In the space of 3 hours, he had gone from a titan of industry to an unemployed pariah. He sat in his silent, empty office, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside his window. Just yesterday, they had looked like a galaxy of opportunities he had conquered. Now, they seemed to be mocking him, each light a tiny, scornful eye judging his spectacular fall from grace. He had lost everything. His company, his friends, his reputation. And the woman he had tried to break had been the one to deliver the final, killing blow. The war wasn't over, but the decisive battle had just been won. Stripped of his power, his name now synonymous with brutality, Ethan became a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. He locked himself in the penthouse, a prisoner in his palace. The silence broken only by the incessant ringing of a phone he never answered. The legal notices began to arrive, a formal divorce filing, a civil suit for damages, and a chillingly official summons from the district attorney's office. The legal machine was grinding into motion, and he was caught in its gears. He was cornered, isolated, and for the first time in his life, genuinely terrified. In the depths of his desperation, his mind, always scheming, latched onto one final, pathetic gamble. He had one card left to play, the very first one he had ever dealt, the one that had won him the kingdom in the first place, the debt of life. He had saved me. He had shielded me from that falling chandelier. Surely, even in her hatred, a part of Ellie must remember that. The foundation of their love, their entire story, was built on that single act of heroism. Convinced that this was his only way out, he began a new, desperate performance. He couldn't get near me, so he turned the street outside my father's Connecticut estate into his stage. He stood at the gates day after day, a disheveled, tragic figure. He didn't shout or cause a scene. He just stood there, in the rain and the sun, his expensive suits wrinkled, a haunted, repentant look on his face, allowing the paparazzi who gathered like vultures to capture his public penance. He was trying to manipulate the only two things he had left, public opinion and my conscience. After 3 days of this pathetic spectacle, I agreed to see him. It wasn't because I felt a flicker of pity. Julian had advised it. "You need to close this door yourself, Ellie," he'd said gently, "for your own peace of mind. Let him say his piece, and then you can finally turn the page." He was brought into a small, formal sitting room. My father was not present. I wanted to face him alone. When Ethan walked in, escorted by a guard, he was a shadow of his former self. He was soaked from a recent downpour, shivering, and he looked like a beggar who had wandered in off the street. The moment he saw me, he collapsed, Not just to his knees, but fully onto the floor, crawling towards me, his last shred of pride cast aside. "Ellie!" He wept. The tears genuine this time. Tears of pure self-pity. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was monstrous. But please think about what we had. Think about that day. All those years ago. I saved your life. Ellie, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be here. Doesn't that count for something? Can't you spare me? For the sake of that one good thing I did." He launched into a rambling, pathetic monologue, painting himself as a tragic hero corrupted by insecurity. He spoke of his impoverished childhood, the chip on his shoulder, the immense pressure of living up to the Vance name. "Everything I did because I was terrified of losing you." He sobbed, his voice cracking. That fear, it twisted me. It made me do things, horrible things. But the love I felt for you, Ellie, that was never a lie. I listened in silence, my face impassive. A few months ago, his words might have torn me apart, but the woman he was appealing to no longer existed. Her heart had turned to stone, then to dust, in the cold of that freezer. Yet, one thing still snagged at my conscience: the life debt. It was the bedrock of our story. It was the one pure, heroic act that I believed was undeniably real. Was it possible he had once been a good man? A man who truly loved me, before ambition consumed him? Seeing my silence, Ethan mistook it for hesitation. He pressed his advantage, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Just withdraw the criminal complaint. Tell your father to call off the dogs. I'll disappear. I'll leave the country and you'll never see me again. Consider it payment for the life I saved. Please, Ellie, I'm begging you." He began to press his forehead to the cold marble floor, a gesture of ultimate submission. But at that exact moment, a calm, authoritative voice cut through his theatrical sobs. "A debt for a life you put in danger in the first place? That's a bold negotiation tactic, Ethan." My father strode into the room, his presence filling it with an aura of cold, commanding power. Julian followed a pace behind him, his expression neutral. Ethan froze, then scrambled backward like a crab, his face a mask of pure terror. The sight of my father, the man he had wronged and written off for dead, still had the power to paralyze him. Richard Vance didn't even glance at the pathetic man on the floor. He walked to a side table, calmly poured himself a glass of water, and took a sip before turning his icy gaze on Ethan. "The hero act. Tell me, after 8 years, don't you get tired of playing this part?" Ethan stammered, his eyes wide. "Mr. Vance, I don't know what you mean. I really did save her." My father let out a short, harsh laugh devoid of any humor. "Save her? Or choreograph a near-death experience to insert yourself into her life?" He set the glass down with a sharp click that made Ethan flinch. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate? Did you think a man like me would accept such a convenient accident at face value?" He gave Julian a slight nod. Julian opened a slim laptop and placed it on the coffee table, angling the screen towards Ethan. He clicked play. A video appeared. The man on the screen was gaunt, his face a roadmap of fear and regret. It was Daniel Miller, the head of maintenance at the Vance Corporation headquarters 8 years ago. The man who had quit and vanished without a trace right after the chandelier incident. In the video, Miller, his voice trembling, confessed everything. He described how a young, ambitious intern named Ethan Reed had approached him. He detailed the offer, a briefcase containing $100,000 in cash more than he made in 3 years in exchange for one simple task. He was to loosen the bolts on the main winch of the grand lobby chandelier, just enough so that a sudden jolt would cause it to break free. Ethan had planned it down to the last second. He knew my schedule, knew exactly when I would be standing in that precise spot. The plan was outrageously risky, a sociopathic gamble with my life and his own. It was designed to cause a spectacular, terrifying crash that would result in, at worst, minor injuries from the cascading crystals, creating the perfect stage for him to play the hero. He had wagered our lives to win a place at my side. Ethan stared at the screen, his breathing shallow, his body rigid. The secret he thought was buried forever was being exhumed right before his eyes. "Lies," he finally choked out, shaking his head violently. "He's lying. You paid him to say that. It's a setup." "Is it?" My father's voice was like a whip crack. "Then what about the $100,000 deposited into his wife's bank account the day after he disappeared? What about the burner phone you used to contact him? which our investigators traced back to a convenience store in Queens. Ethan, your mistake wasn't your ambition. It was your arrogance. You always underestimated me. Every word was a nail driving into his sanity. His entire life, his entire identity as a self-made man who won the princess, was a fraud from the very beginning. I sat there, frozen, the world tilting on its axis. The last remaining pillar of my past had just been dynamited. The one pure memory, the one selfless act I had clung to, was the most calculated deceit of all. He hadn't saved me. He had nearly murdered me. The love story I had cherished for 8 years was not a fairy tale. It was the opening chapter of a horror story. A single tear, the very last one I would ever shed for him, traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of disgust. Seeing it, Ethan knew he was utterly and completely defeated. The fight went out of him, replaced by something broken and unhinged. A strange, gurgling laugh escaped his lips. It grew louder, more manic, a sound of pure madness echoing through the silent, opulent room. He was laughing at my naivety, at my father's cunning, and at the spectacular, tragic absurdity of his own ruined life. The laughter cut off abruptly as his body began to convulse. He fell to the floor, shaking violently, foam frothing at his lips. His mind, unable to process the complete annihilation of his reality, had simply shattered. When the convulsion subsided, he lay still on the marble, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling with a vacant, unseeing gaze. He began to mumble nonsensical fragments of words. The doctor who was summoned concluded it was a severe psychotic break, brought on by extreme psychological distress. Ethan Reed, the master manipulator, had lost his mind. He was taken away, not to a prison, but to a high-security psychiatric hospital. His meticulously directed play had ended, and he was now trapped in a permanent, improvised epilogue of madness. The sole audience member of his own shattered psyche, Ethan's descent into madness was a grim, pathetic end to his story. He became a ghost in a locked ward, his days a chaotic jumble of vacant stares and frantic whispers, his nights filled with shrieks that echoed through the sterile halls. He would have moments of lucidity, where he would weep for his Ellie, followed by hours of paranoid rage where he would curse the name Chloe Sanders. The brilliant, Machiavellian mind was gone, leaving only the wreckage. With Ethan declared mentally incompetent, the legal proceedings moved swiftly. Julian and his team dismantled what was left of his assets. The penthouse, the cars, the stocks of everything was seized to cover the company's debts and pay the damages awarded to me. In the civil suit, Reed Industries, now a hollowed-out shell, was officially reacquired by my father for pennies on the dollar. The first order of business was to remove Ethan's name from the building. The golden letters were pried from the facade, and the proud, original name was restored, Vance Corporation. It was as if Ethan Reed had been erased from the city's skyline. A brief, ugly stain that had finally been wiped clean. About a week after he was committed, I decided to go to the hospital. It wasn't for closure, and it wasn't for gloating. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a need to see the final chapter with my own eyes. I didn't go in. I stood on the other side of a thick pane of reinforced glass in the observation room, looking into the facility's bleak common area. He was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, like a child. He was intently focused on a single, fallen leaf he held in his hand, turning it over and over. He looked up, his eyes unfocused, and a goofy, vacant smile spread across his face. "Ellie," he mumbled to the empty air in front of him. "Look, I caught a butterfly for you. Isn't it pretty?" He was harmless, broken, pathetic. Looking at this empty shell of a man, I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no satisfaction. Just a profound, aching emptiness. The man who had caused me so much agony was gone, replaced by this simpleton. Fate had dealt him a punishment far crueler than prison or death. It hadn't killed him. It had erased him, leaving his body behind as a living tombstone. There is no victory in defeating an opponent who no longer knows he's in a fight. I turned away from the glass. Julian was waiting for me at the end of the hall. He didn't say a word. He just held out a handkerchief. I took it, surprised to find that my cheeks were wet. They weren't tears of grief or rage. They were tears of release. A final, cleansing rain washing away the last dregs of the past. The name Ethan Reed would no longer have any power over me. He was a nightmare from which I had finally, completely, awoken. While Ethan was lost in his own broken mind, Chloe was living a different kind of hell. With a nationwide warrant out for her arrest, she had become a fugitive. Her bank accounts were frozen. Her face was on the news, and her carefully planned escape route had vanished. She was living out of cheap motels on the city's grimy fringes, paying in cash. Her days a blur of fear and paranoia. Every police siren sent a jolt of terror through her. She had become a hunted animal. In her desperation, she made one last, fatal miscalculation. She still believed there was a bond between her and Ethan, a connection forged in their shared crimes. She still had access to one thing, a hidden account in the Caymans, filled with money she had siphoned from the Golden Bay Project. It was enough for two people to start over, somewhere far away. Driven by a toxic mix of nostalgia and survival instinct, she disguised herself as a janitor and managed to sneak into the psychiatric hospital. She found Ethan in his room, using wooden blocks to build a lopsided, unstable tower. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice urgent after she'd locked the door. "It's me, Chloe. You have to listen to me. I have money. A lot of it. Enough for us to get away from all this. I can get you out of here." He looked up slowly, his eyes clearing for a brief, terrifying moment. The vacant smile disappeared, replaced by a contorted mask of pure hatred. In his shattered reality, she was the serpent. She was the root of all his suffering. "You," he snarled. A low, guttural sound. He lunged at her, his movements clumsy but fueled by a madman's strength. "It was you? You took her from me. You ruined everything." He tackled her to the ground, his hands closing around her throat. The last vestiges of her affection for him evaporated, replaced by the primal will to live. As they struggled, they knocked over a bedside lamp, shattering the ceramic base on the tile floor. Her flailing hand closed around a sharp, jagged piece of porcelain. Without a second's thought, she drove it into his side. He roared in pain and surprise, his grip loosening. The sound of their struggle brought nurses and orderlies running, their fists pounding on the locked door. As they burst in, they were met with a scene from a slaughterhouse. Chloe, her face a mask of terror, was scrambling away from Ethan, who was staggering towards her, the shard of ceramic still embedded in his side, blood pouring from the wound. In a final, convulsive movement, he lunged, pulling the shard from his own body and slashing it across her throat. She collapsed in a heap, her life gurgling away in a crimson torrent. Ethan stood over her body for a moment, a triumphant, demonic grin on his face, before he swayed and fell backward. The wound was too deep. The blood loss was too severe. They died on the cold, white floor of that hospital room, just feet apart. The two people whose lives had been defined by a shared, toxic ambition had ultimately, fittingly, destroyed each other. The news of their violent end was a shocking, gruesome finale to the saga. The police investigation was brief. It was ruled a murder-suicide. The legal cases against them were officially closed. The accomplices, including Todd Jennings and the others, were sentenced for their roles in my assault, receiving prison terms that reflected their cooperation but still held them accountable. Justice, messy and brutal, had finally been served. The storm was over. But after the storm, there was a quiet, a silence that can be peaceful, or a silence that can be deafening. For a long time, mine was the latter. The purpose that had driven meth quest for justice was gone. I was adrift in a calm sea. The shores of my old life burned behind me, and the horizon of my new life a blank, intimidating fog. One afternoon, Julian found me in the garden. He didn't come with files or legal updates. He came with a tea set. He brewed the tea with a quiet, focused grace, the ritual itself a calming presence. "It's over," he said, handing me a steaming cup. "But you don't look like someone who won." I sighed, the warmth of the cup seeping into my hands. "I don't feel like I won," I admitted. "I just feel tired and empty. What am I supposed to do now?" He looked at me, his gaze direct and sincere. "You don't have to do anything, Ellie. You just have to be. Let yourself rest. Let yourself heal. Victory in a war like this doesn't bring celebration. It brings peace. The peace to start again." His words were simple, but they landed with profound weight. He was right. My battle wasn't with Ethan anymore. It was with the ghosts he had left behind. In the months that followed, I slowly began to find my way. I took over as chairwoman of the Vance Corporation, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I saw it not as a machine for making money, but as a tool for creating change. In my first board meeting, I announced a new corporate mandate, a shift towards sustainable technology, ethical investments, and a massive expansion of our philanthropic foundation. I was going to use Advanced power and wealth to build, not to break. A year to the day after the freezer, I stood on a quiet hill overlooking the ocean. I had placed a small, simple stone of white marble under a beautiful ginkgo tree. It wasn't a grave. It was a place of remembrance. The inscription read, "My little angel, forever in my heart." I placed a small bouquet of white baby's breath at its base. I didn't cry. I simply spoke to him. My voice carried on the sea breeze. "It's all over. My sweet boy," I whispered. "Mommy is okay now. The bad people are gone. You're leaving." It hurt more than anything in the world. But it also saved me. It woke me up. And I promise you, I will live a life worthy of the sacrifice you made. I will make you proud. A gentle gust of wind rustled the golden leaves of the ginkgo tree. As if in reply, I smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile. I had found my purpose. It wasn't in revenge. It wasn't rebirth. 2 years later, the Vance Corporation announced the launch of its largest charitable initiative ever, the Angel Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid, psychological counseling, and safe housing for women and children who are victims of domestic abuse. At the press conference, standing on the stage, I felt a sense of peace I never thought possible. My pain had been transformed. It had been alchemized from a personal tragedy into a public good. The scars were still there. They would always be a part of me. But they no longer hurt. They were just a reminder of the battle I had fought, and the woman I had become. As the sun set that evening, I stood on the balcony of my office, looking out at the city. A new day was dawning. Not just for the city, but for me. The long, cold winter of my grief had finally given way to spring. I had walked through the frost of deceit and emerged on the other side. Not broken, but whole.